Hi, welcome to the Halloween version of the THC show with Neil. This is the show where we attempt to expose some of the nasty truths in our world, but hopefully provide some hope and some mechanisms for change in the process as well. Off the top, I want to mention that we're having a protest tomorrow on Wednesday here in Vancouver at 1 p.m. at the VPD station at the foot of Cambie Street at the Cambie Street Bridge. And we're protesting the involvement with the CSU by the VPD, where they have been involved in shutting down most recently the Stock Market Indigenous Dispensary on West Broadway. And they are one of the contributors to our program where we give out cannabis to people on the downtown east side to keep them from overdosing on opioids. And we're very, very upset that this has happened, that the CSU is operating in Vancouver and that the VPD are helping them, despite a motion by the City Council a couple months ago to allow the dispensing of cannabis for the opioid crisis and low barrier cannabis and low barrier access. So very upset that that's going on, and we're having a protest about that tomorrow at 1 p.m. So if you've got some time, if you've got some friends, if you can make some signs, come on down and join us, and let's make a real statement. This is about the access to medical cannabis. If you're unhappy that dispensaries have shut down and the only cannabis that's available legally is not medical cannabis at all, then this is an opportunity that we have to make a statement about that. The media's been alerted. They will be there. We'll have a good crowd of people. So I hope to see you there. Coming up on the show today, very happy to have Chris Bennett. As usual, 8 out of 10 Glenn from CannaMatch is going to join us for the 420 session, and Jerry Martin's going to be here as usual for the Martin Medical Moment as we talk about the constitutional challenges going on across Canada and what's going on with trying to fight the government and their corporate buddies in allowing access to medical cannabis the way that we deserve it and should have it. Last week on the show, Jamie Shaw was here. She's taken a job with an LP. And one of the comments she made later on in her interview was about how, pretty much cannabis has been $10 a gram for her whole life here in Vancouver, and that she's okay with that. I'm not sure exactly what she was trying to say, but I think that, she's trying to pave the way for it being still okay to pay $10 a gram in the legal world for cannabis. And in fact, as we know, they're charging a lot more than that already. Usually $12 a gram is at the low end, and it goes way up from there with some of the craft growers that they're now introducing at $20 a gram. And, excuse me, but we really need to give our heads a real serious shake here, I mean, this is a plant. It's a plant that grows so easy they call it a weed. If you put a lot of good care and attention into it, you can get really good quality cannabis. And people like that cannabis a lot. But we've really been tricked into this whole thing of paying $10 a gram for cannabis, or for any plant for that matter. I mean, we're right back to where we were in Holland in the 1600s, where it would cost 10 times the salary of a skilled laborer to buy one tulip bulb. Of course, the bottom fell right out of that one day when all of a sudden people just kind of gave their heads a shake and stopped paying it, and the tulips on the auction block went unsold. And that was the end of that ridiculous period where, for a bunch of different reasons that came together, people got all excited about tulips and were willing to pay fortunes to get single tulips. So we're kind of back to that now. I mean, cannabis is awesome and everything, that's for sure, and people like it, and they're willing to pay for it. In Vancouver, we've been willing to pay basically $10 a gram for as long as I've been alive, but that same gram of BC bud is sold throughout my life in New York for $20 a gram. And in rural Canada, all across Canada, in small towns, Ontario, the prairies, it's $20 a gram for ditchweed, for crapweed. And when you go farther up north into the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, well, it's way above that. It's like double that. And it's just, and in fact, in other countries around the world where you can be executed for having just over an ounce of weed, it can be $100 a gram. And all of that is just supply and demand economics. It's got nothing to do with what it actually costs to produce the plant. If the plant were free and legal as it should be, and horticulturalists and farmers could just grow it as they choose, then it wouldn't be anywhere close to anything per gram. We wouldn't be talking in terms of grams. You know, horticulturalists and farmers grow heirloom tomatoes, and they get a pretty good buck for them. They get about $4 a pound for them, and they dedicate huge, vast acres of land and big greenhouses and all kinds of care to get those heirloom tomatoes to market at $4 a pound. But here we are with cannabis that per square foot will grow you $2,000 for the same square footage for cannabis without much more care and attention than it takes to get an heirloom tomato to market. So we've just been fooled and we've been tricked and we've been sucked in by prohibition prices and supply and demand economics where they keep the supply really tight and then the demand really high, and then they can get what they want for it. You know, in Russia, a couple hundred years ago, they prohibited coffee. And what happened was the demand for coffee went through the roof and the price of coffee went through the roof. And that's just the dynamics of prohibition. And that's what's going on here. These people are trying to treat cannabis as if it's some dangerous, super amazing, at the same time commodity that they get to charge all this money for. And we're willing to pay it because we're used to being oppressed with this particular plant and we know the value of it. And so rather than pay the farmer what it actually would have cost to bring it to market, people are willing to pay enormous amounts, and it's just wrong. And I gotta say that, you know, this whole thing, this so-called legalization is nothing but a cruel joke on the casual user of cannabis and the person that wants to use some cannabis on a Friday or Saturday night just to feel good or have an experience. But it is an absolute nightmare for the medical patients who need cannabis. And there's a lot of depression going on about this. There's a lot of depression within the cannabis activism community and a lot of depression in general in our world. Depression is a very costly thing. It touches so many aspects of life and it costs our society so much. In fact, in the United States, the Scientific America estimates that it's about $210 billion a year, just the cost of depression to our society. And actually in Canada, they figure it's about $50 billion a year, with major depression affecting about 16 million Americans as well at any given time. And you know, depression is quite the thing, and I've been through it myself, and I feel very, very fortunate in my life that I've been able to figure out strategies for how to deal with depression, and more than that, I'm lucky because I was born with a predisposition to probably not be as easily depressed, and I've kind of got that little energy and jump in my step that you know, I just come by naturally, and a lot of people do. And to not be depressed is a lot easier for some than it is for others. In fact, not just your predisposition and how you're born and what kind of a personality you have when you're popped out, but what happens to you along the way, the traumas that you suffer, the family environment, the way you're treated by your parents, and all of those sorts of things shape a person, and they shape a person into the habits that they have. And we're all pretty much just creatures of habit. That's what we are, as collections of individual habits that make us our personality. And it's not that easy to deal with habits and the ones that we have. And the older you get, the harder they can be to change. But we can change our habits, and it's not a completely lost cause. And it's not all that, you know, you're predisposed to this or your environment determines that, and that's just the way it is. You can do something about it, and many people do, and there are strategies for doing that, and I count myself among those. And pretty much it's a matter of what you're focused on. It's, you know, whatever your focus is, that becomes your reality. And if you're focusing on things that are negative and that make you unhappy, then that's how you're going to feel. And there's plenty to be depressed about. I mean, you could be depressed your whole life with no problem. I mean, moment by moment, there's just a ton of things that you could focus on that will make you miserable. But that's not the best way to live, as we know. And if you don't want to live that way, then you need to form different habits and try to get into the habit of staying focused on positive things. all you really own in this world is how you feel in this moment right here. There really is nothing else. And moment by moment, all we own is how we feel. We feel about the things that have happened to us. We feel about the things that we have. We feel about the things that we want. We feel about the things that we don't have. We feel about the people in our lives. We feel about life in general. And all of these things, how we feel, is really what we're trying to accomplish, is that we want to feel good. And the way to feel good is to stay focused on positive things. Very easy to say, but if you always look on the bright side of things, and just about everything has a bright side, and not everything does. I mean, there are things in particular, I'm sure the death of a child, I'm sure lots of things are very, very depressing. And you don't want to completely avoid feeling those feelings. It's part of being a human to feel those. But you want to process it, and you don't want to linger on it, and you don't want to make it now change your life so that you're a person who's always focused on these negative things. You know, we need to count our blessings and not our losses. And it's something that I do every night as I'm putting my head on the pillow. As I try to come up with 20 or 30 things that I'm feeling really lucky about and really blessed to have going on in my life. And I think that helps shape how I dream, and I think that helps shape how I wake up in the morning. And I try to have a positive step early in the morning and keep it that way. But these are habits that I've worked on forming over the years. I was lucky to read the series of books called Neuro-Linguistic Programming about how we can go in and affect how we feel about things and how we think about things. And it's how we think about things that determines how we feel about things. You should let your default be positive and not negative. The first reaction to something negative that happens, if you can try to keep that from being anger or sadness and make it more funny that the universe is playing tricks on you, or oh my, there's a whole series of bad things that have happened, ha ha, I must be a bad luck charmer, whatever. But humor is way better than anger, and laughter is way better than being sad about things. There's only really two types of things in life. There's those things that you can change, and there's those things that you can't change. And even of the things that you can change, there's only two types. The things that are worth your effort and the things that aren't. So I try to, as I go through encountering different problems in my life and things that are an issue, I try to think, well, can I change that? And what would it take to change that? And is it worth my time and effort to try to do that? And I don't let myself spend much time on the things that I can't change, that I'm not happy about. They just are what are. Ultimately, the answer is love, and the answer is forgiveness, that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have and who they are. People make mistakes. People don't understand other people. People have things that drive them, motivations that they aren't even able to control in many cases. And I think it's best, rather than to hang on to something that someone's done against you or that's done that wasn't right, but to try to understand that, people are trapped in their own realities of doing what they have to do because of who they are and what they've been through. And it's a real struggle for a lot of people to be different than that. And some people make bad choices. And it doesn't help you to hang on to what other people have done to hurt you. It doesn't hurt them to hang on to what other people have done to hurt you in most cases. It hurts you. And we really put ourselves into little prison cells of anger and hatred towards people and what's been done to us. And not just us personally, but the injustices of the world, and there's lots of them. For me, I focus on the drug war because I need an outlet for the anger that I have about things that have happened that I don't want to focus on. So I focus on trying to end the drug war and trying to get rights and freedoms for people, because I don't like bullies, and I don't like thieves and liars, and I don't like what's going on in our corrupt governments here, where public servants think that they're dictators of ours and they can do whatever they want. But that's a battle that I fight without being angry all the time about it, because although I am underneath, I know, and there's underlying anger that I focus on that, and that is what drives me. But living in anger is no way to live. Being positive and happy and in awe of our universe and the fact that we have life at all and all that is good around us is a much better way to live. So I thought on this Halloween Eve, I would mention some of that, and perhaps you can take something out of that if you're struggling with depression. There are ways out of it, and it is a very debilitating thing. And this whole drug war thing is depressing, and the whole access to medical cannabis is depressing, and all the rest of that. But if we just focus on the positive things, if we focus on the fact that we are moving forward in positive ways, that these are steps in a direction that will probably lead us eventually to some cannabis freedom, then we can stay positive about that. And I think it's good to stay positive in the fight for these things. I've watched a lot of activists come and go that get overwhelmed by just how many people are having their lives ruined, how much money is being wasted, how many lies we're being told, and how much it's affecting our families and the rest of us to have these corporate bastards decide that they can exploit us and sell us their stuff and our stuff at exorbitant prices and monopolize those things and all these things that are in place to allow that to happen. It is a very depressing world if you look at it like that. But I'm saying let's not look at it like that, or at least let's let that depressing part motivate us to move forward into a more positive future, and that we can be happy and excited and feel some good about where we're going, as opposed to being focused on how bad it is and how bad it's been. So there's my little rant for the day that I wanted to get off my chest, because I know a lot of people that suffer with these things, and I tell them all the time, just stay focused on positive things. Just assume the best, let go of the rest, and all that stuff. And it's easy to say, but I wanted to share that because I try to take it to heart, and I wish so many other people would, and I see people struggling with this, and maybe that's of some help. So we'll move to the news, which of course is mostly depressing. And the first story is, depending on how you look at it, the Hexo Corp is reporting $56.7 million losses for their fourth quarter. That's based on expectations of selling up to $400 million worth of cannabis to people. But, not everybody's jumping on that, and hopefully we all don't jump on that. And like I say, let's give our heads a shake and stop paying dollars per gram for cannabis when we should be paying probably maybe $100 to $200 for a pound. And that might sound ridiculous to you, but just go and look what happened to tulips and think about it for a minute, that you can grow as much cannabis in a square foot of ground as you can grow tulips. And the only reason all the farmers aren't growing cannabis to sell to people at these high prices is because you're either doing it illegally, where they're going to seize your property, arrest you, put you in jail, and you're going to lose everything for trying to do that, or you're going to join a legal system where they want $300,000 for a license, and they're going to restrict the hell out of you and put regulations on you that make it so you won't even want to do that anyway, and you're not going to make a huge amount of dollars anyway. And I'm kind of glad that these big corporations that thought that they could jump in and keep selling people weed at prohibition prices are losing money and making their shareholders nervous. So I'm happy that's happening. And definitely we need to see much lower prices for cannabis in the future. And we're going to work on that. Meanwhile, there's an idiot that got elected into Manitoba. I don't know what you Manitobans are doing. Is it only the stupid people that are voting there? Because your premier has decided that you can't come out of your house if you've consumed cannabis edibles. What kind of a moron is he? I mean, what century is he from? I mean, is he only reading Reefer Madness? I mean, go ahead, have a few drinks, go out into public. Go ahead, have a fight with your wife and go out into public. Go ahead, do a whole bunch, anything else. But don't you be eating cannabis edibles, because them shit's dangerous, right? Not. So he's a fool and will be exposed as such, and the name Brian Pallister will be used as a joke for a long time to come. Man, oh man, oh Manitobans. Quebec. Yes, the brilliant public servants in Quebec have decided that the black market can have everybody under 21. Because now you're going to have to be 21 to buy weed legally in Quebec. Not that you yet want to buy legal weed. We've covered all of that. But the government has still decided that you can't be legal. You can't have weed legally until you're 21 years of age. And I guess everybody's obviously just going to obey that, aren't they? I mean, those kids that are 19 and 20, they're not going to be smoking weed in Quebec, are they? So nobody's going to be able to sell them weed, are they? Because they're not going to be smoking weed. Well, you're idiots in Quebec if that's what you think. You are handing your children over to the underground market. That's the last place I want my 17 or 18-year-old daughter to be, is in some guy's basement suite getting weed and bumped up to cocaine or whatever else happens in that basement suite. So yeah, I'm a little upset about that one too. I'm upset about lots of things these days, and that's another one for sure. But On a positive note, sort of, although the restrictions against cannabis and growing hemp are pretty severe. It's 420, I see that. We're going to do the 420 session in just a second. But on a positive note, they're going to use hemp batteries now that are apparently 8 times better than lithium and graphene. And hemp ethanol is 5 times cheaper than gasoline. And once we remove all these stupid restrictions for these things, well, we'll have a much better world and our economy will be much better. So anyway, it's 420, 421 even. If you got them, you've already lit them. There we go. And we always like to celebrate the 420 moment or session here because it's part of our culture and our tradition that at 420, people get together and share weed and talk about why prohibition sucks. And as always, I have Glenn Wells with me today to share the 420 session. I shouldn't say as always because you weren't here last week.
Well, no, I was here last week, but it was the week before. Yes. I was doing the election thing.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh, I know, eh?
So how you doing, Glenn?
Good, how are you, Neil?
Pretty good.
Feeling better this week, are you?
A little better. I'm not 100% yet, but I'm feeling better.
You're looking better.
Yeah, it's only because of the mask. It hides my
It is the mask. Did you hear about that guy in Mission, the Shatter Lab being busted?
Oh, that's my friend
Darren, yes.
That's what started it all off for me, besides getting a cold.
I was with him today in court, in family court and stuff with him.
I'm going to ask you about that in just a sec. But I got a cold, which I haven't had in decades. I don't get colds, I don't get flu. But I got one this year.
Yeah.
And right after that, Darren gets raided in Mission there. They bring in the tank from Abbotsford, the helicopter. They deport his wife down the United States. They take his children away from him, and I think he still doesn't have those. Maybe you can give me an update. But Darren is one of the nicest, most compassionate, good human beings on the planet. He produces cannabis with licenses to do that. And gives it away for the most part. He's not allowed to do that, but he does. But he's making RSO. They accused him of making shatter up there, and he has, but not for a long time because the RSO seems to be better for people and helping them with their medical conditions. And Darren gives it away. So I was so upset to hear about that, and that sparked a bunch of other different things that have happened. We're going to get to the stock market being raided as well. But tell me about what happened.
Apparently he got swatted. And that's what the police were told, that there was guns and stuff in there. And when they got there, they found the children and they found his RSO lab and they took his lab down and he's got an MMAR, so he's totally protected. They haven't charged him with anything. Now the children are wondering why they can't see their parents and stuff. He's got a couple of visits per week, and I think a phone call per week right now. And he's going back.
And Mom's down in the States, and they're telling her she's going to be there for at least a year.
Yeah, she has an immigration order. They call it IO. So she's to stay there for a whole year. But they have an appeal. They're filed appeal today for that. So
our government with our tax dollars harming harmless people.
And some person calling and saying that this was happening at this place when it wasn't really happening. There was no guns there. There was nothing there. Those children were put down on the ground. They had police and guns and everything.
Down my cheeks. I couldn't believe it.
I know. It's like, wow. And one person gets arrested at a shatter lab. I don't think one person would be making shatter. Usually you have to have a team of people there.
No one was harmed. There was no victim. There was nothing going on that was ongoing harm of anybody. This is all just outrageous prohibition, trying their very best to restrict this access to this amazing healing herb because of how valuable it is, and they just don't want to let it out there the way it should be.
And Darren actually donates RSO to a friend of mine in Ontario, Jen. She's got epilepsy, and she's been walking with a walker and didn't have a life, and she got some RSO, and now she's totally... She can go to the store. She can go shopping. Her mom doesn't have to be with her 24/7
well, except
anymore.
Now maybe she can't get her RSO.
We just sent her 2 more bottles.
And Darren,
that should be it. Darren can't make any more.
Supplies our Cannabis Substitution Project as well. They've been down many times doing free dabs for people to try to offset the use of opioids and stuff. It is just such an atrocity. I am outraged by this. We all need to be outraged by not just Darren's case, but this is going on all over the place, and this has been going on for a while. Our forefathers went and fought for a free country, and this is the freedom that we're being given. So disrespectful to those family members of ours.
Like
it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. Hey, that's very tasty. What are we smoking?
Hey, Doug. I can't say I can't type because I'm on the Facebook blog, but Doug just said hi to us.
Oh, is that what's going
Doug
on?
Sikora.
You know, I don't do the chat thing when I'm on this show, and I'm sorry, chatters.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that over the course of time, I'm going to be able to figure it out and be able to devote some time to it. I know that sounds dumb, but it's hard for me to focus moment by moment on what I need to do here.
Yeah, and then also be typing at the same time. Yes.
So maybe one day down the road, when I get to be okay at doing this, I'll figure out how to do that too. Yeah. In the meantime, I do notice the comments, and I appreciate so many of your comments. And I'm sorry I don't respond right away or anything. And please forgive me for that. Don't get depressed about it if you will.
Yeah. And I'll block for 30 days, or else I would have said hi in the comment box, but I can't even do that, right?
Yeah, Glenn's blocked from Facebook for 30 days because he posted an extract package.
Yes.
You know, I do that all the time.
Yep, there we go.
You know, there we go. They're wonderful.
Blocked for 30 days. Michael Kleiman has been helping me out.
It's just, more horrible prohibitionist thinking. I don't know what the hell Facebook, either they've bought into the reefer madness, but much more likely they're profiting on the continued prohibition of cannabis and the reefer madness that's going on here.
Right.
One thing I didn't mention, talking about depression, it's not just the mental things that you can do about forming good habits. But there's other things that you can do. You can actually go swimming, or you can watch a funny movie, or you
go
can
to the sauna.
So many things.
Yep.
And there's cannabis.
Take some acid.
Microdose some acid.
There you go.
Not recommended if you haven't done that before. You need to do that in the right scene and setting with people who know what's going on. But cannabis is one of the most amazing antidepressants.
Have been using it for 38 years.
That's what it did for me.
Today I got told by my psychiatrist that he doesn't need to see me for 6 months now. Nice. He says, I'm going to get rid of you, he says. Yeah. It's been 7 years.
He's bought a boat from you.
And he's like German, and he said 20 years ago he had a patient that was really couldn't handle medication, and he disappeared for a little while, and then he came back and he saw Dr. Strauss. He said, Dr. Strauss, he says, I've been using cannabis. And he saw that he had made this all big improvement, and he started even believing in cannabis as a psychiatrist. And now 20 years later, I'm much better because of cannabis also. So he was mentioning that to me today. So
prohibition has so messed up our medical system here. If you're going to tell a lie, it needs to be a big lie if you want to succeed. Yeah. And that's what they did. They started out by saying, you read the reports of what was said about cannabis back in the days when they were prohibiting it early in the century here in the United States. And it was just the most violent inducing substance that would cause you to rape and kill people and die yourself of a horrible death from being addicted to it. And they really told the most horrible lies about it. And the truth is really the complete opposite.
Yeah,
it is a violent suppressor. Yeah. It is a definite antidepressant. Yeah. Anti-anxiety, anti-pain.
I haven't seen people that it does give anxiety to, though there is
the
opposites
wrong
to
strain,
us.
sure, because it has both of those extremes to it. It's amazing as a medicine that it is both a stimulant and a relaxant, depending on the strain and depending on the person. And so, but we've been lied to so severely about this plant. I'm going to talk to Chris Bennett a little bit, and he talks in here about how the Catholic Church had a little bit to do with that anybody that knew anything to do with the herbs was a witch and needed to be burned.
Wow. And yet he put the plant on the earth for us, apparently. Well. Right? I give you all the seeds and all the fruit-bearing plants and whatever you need, right?
I'm going to ask you about that, how much the references in the Old Testament of the Bible, in that first chapter of Genesis, talking about exactly that I give you the herb-bearing seeds.
Everything that you'll
need.
And
that I find them to be very good. And that they are for everyone, is what was said there. And so, how does that mesh with the Catholic Church deciding that anybody with any knowledge of the herbs, was evil?
Wow.
It gets twisted so far around,
Just shows you how religion can be twisted so far around, just like that,
And mostly it's because they don't have the interests of the people in mind.
No.
They've got their own interests
Yep.
and their own special interest groups behind them.
Yep.
And that's why it all gets twisted. That's why our governments have gotten twisted. That's why religion has gotten twisted. That's why medicine has gotten twisted. It all gets twisted because they put profits over people.
Yeah.
And man, oh man, it is so obvious. Chris is going to be such a great guest today to expose a lot of that for us. And the roots run very, very deep.
Yes. Oh, I've always wondered about that question. You know, like how the churches were always against cannabis, but yet it was one of the plants that was put on our planet, right, or that we're supposed to be using, right? So, Egyptians, they found marijuana in an Egyptian tomb, like over 2,000-year-old marijuana and a pipe too. Right.
The fact that we have, and we share this with the other vertebrates on the planet, and more than just the vertebrates, but we have endocannabinoid systems.
Yep.
And the fact that we have an endocannabinoid system that goes back millennia, that we share with all the other, vertebrates, speaks to the ingestion of cannabis amongst all of these species for all of this time. It is one of these staple food sources that we had. It's a very ancient plant with male and female, and how it sends its roots down and how it gains its nutrients. And that ancient plant has been ingested by our ancestors for millennia. Yeah. And here we are.
And how it's just your Zactor knife, and how easy it is to grow.
Yeah, and it adapts so
like
quickly into other environments.
Right?
It grows like a weed.
Yep.
It doesn't take more than a couple generations to adapt to quite a different environment.
Exactly.
Well, Glenn, that was a great session.
Yeah.
And we'll do it again next week.
See you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Neil.
That always gets me going. I don't know, maybe the audience notices the change there. I should have stayed where I was, maybe. But I'm over here now. So, there used to be a show here on Pot TV where they would gather together and smoke samples of weed sent into them by people who were trying to win a contest. It was called The Contest. And I observed that on many occasions in the audience, and I would notice as the people involved would ingest cannabis, and then over the period of a few minutes, you would see as how their moods progressed and their emotions elevated, and the conversation got much more lively and animated. So maybe you guys are noticing that as well, and maybe that's a good thing with the program here, is that we have the 420 session and we get things a little more animated and going on. So the next segment that we have, as always, is the Martin Medical Moment. And here's the session where we, like a session on the brain here today. It's the segment where we talk about what's going on in the world of medical cannabis pursuits to have access to medical cannabis and how that's going within the courts. And it's called the Martin Medical Moment because one of the people that have launched a challenge against the medical system or the lack thereof is Jerry Martin. And he was a dispensary owner in small town Saskatchewan and ran his dispensary there for 4 years. Got a warning from Health Canada to shut down, but ended up getting raided by the local RCMP and put in handcuffs and arrested and had all of his stuff. And that's a lot of stuff seized, stolen, and now faces continued persecution on the account. Well, let me ask Jerry, because Jerry's here again as always. How you doing, Jerry?
Good, you?
Good. Don't want to get the facts wrong.
No.
They'd blame it on me just smoking weed
I
or
don't know
something.
anything either.
Well, how long has it been since you got your raid happened, or since the raid happened?
It'll be 3 years, November 7th. Yeah.
November's like coming right up.
Yeah, it'll be 3-year anniversary, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And still you haven't had your day in court, other than all the days you've had in court to try to have your day in court.
Yeah. Yeah, no, still waiting. Should be in the spring. I'm hoping. I emailed my lawyer the other day. He's in Alberta working on another case, but they still haven't got a date for trial. Although we have put a few motions through and the constitutional challenge, so I'm sure the judge has to review that.
Yeah, you put in a bunch of witness statements and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure that'll take them another 6 months to get around to reading those. Maybe I'm not sure.
I'm gonna take my mask off now.
Yeah. Apparently, it's supposed to be February, March is what they're aiming for, but I don't know if that's set in stone or not. That one, the friend in Sarah and her boyfriend Sean they're doing a constitutional challenge.
Sarah McNeil.
Yeah.
That just wrapped up.
Yeah, so well, sort of. No,
sort of. They got final arguments coming in February, but the trial itself has wrapped up.
So maybe that'll happen.
Sarah said she just kicked their ass.
Yeah.
She's really excited about it, and we'll see what final arguments do. But Sarah's team put together 14 witnesses that went mostly unchallenged, and the Crown only had one witness, and they got nothing.
Well, they don't have any witnesses for my case.
They don't have any justification.
They don't have a single witness. They have I think one RCMP or two RCMP, but they have no other witnesses.
Well, we were talking expert witnesses. I think Sarah said they had one.
Right.
But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I can't see Saskatchewan forking out a bunch of money for expert witnesses. I just can't see it.
Yeah. Well. Good.
But they'll have wasted
a
lot of money.
There are no experts, Jerry. What would experts say?
Well,
the experts that were in the Allard trial got their asses kicked.
Yeah.
Those guys don't ever want to be experts against cannabis in a courtroom again.
No.
The judge slapped them down good.
Yeah.
They were full of shit.
Well, that's it. They try and present lies, right?
Yeah.
Hope that you're not going to defend yourself in those lies.
Yeah. And see through them. And yet we have judges sitting on the bench. Their job is to see through them. So let's hope that the judges continue to see through the lies.
Let's hope he's an honest judge and not just friends with everybody that he sees every day.
I'm a bit of a... I don't know what the word is. I do know, but it's not coming to me at this moment. But I'm a cynic. That's what
I'm a cynic myself.
I'm a cynic. I don't trust these bastards at all.
Me either.
I believe that they're cheating us every chance that they get. And I believe that a judge is being paid off out of our money, about $250,000 around there, to sit on that bench every day and toe the party line and do injustice when it comes to the cannabis file.
It is, and well, and a lot of these injustices they can't even help but not do because someone else has done that injustice, and they have to go by that injustice. They can't use their own minds. That would be insane.
And that's why they want to get some expert
witnesses. They're supposed
witnesses.
to be judges, but they're not really allowed to judge on anything themselves. They have to judge on past.
It's very narrow focus what they can judge on.
Yeah.
And they even tell you that from the bench because they're embarrassed for themselves.
Yeah.
And they go, really, I'm not able to judge on these issues here. We're only talking about these issues. So don't blame me. Yeah. Oh, it's just sad. It's so sad. And
And so what they're trying to do is compare me to the football player there, the Neary case, where I think he was growing weed or whatever he's selling out of his house or car or whatever. He was not doing it for a medical use. But this is the laws that they're comparing mine to, my case. Not as a dispensary, not like they're doing everywhere else, but as a drug dealer.
Not as someone who is trying to comply with the government system as best you could in that market, with a focus on patients and people first.
So if I do lose, I'm doing that mandatory time. Plus,
and what's the mandatory time?
They want 2 to 5, and then they want. They're probably going to want more now. And that was back then. And $600,000 fine.
I will remind you, you're a cynic.
Yes, I am.
Cynicism comes in many different levels and degrees, and it combines with other different takes on things. As we multitask on these ideas that we have. You are more of a cynic yourself than I am, and especially with respect to your own future. And I know you're aware of that.
I'm not really a cynic to other things. It's my own future.
I try to be a realist as well, but...
Well, that's what I'm trying to do so that I'm not too fucking disappointed when they show up.
Hey, this is kind of perfect, and I wondered, life is a bunch of synchronicities. I mean, all this stuff gets set up before we ever walk into these moments, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And I've had a very interesting 3 weeks, and I had an interesting day today, and when I walked into the studios to get prepared earlier today, we had interesting conversations. You watched my rant today. It was a lot to do with that kind of stuff, and geez, now I'm going to lose my train of thought. That's what I get for smoking weed. But the cynicism we were talking about, and I try to be a realist about these things as well. But I'm not always right about it. I'm brought to task by a lot of people at times about how, while you're off base here, and I mean, Freddie Pritchard likes to show me that he was more right than me. Although he kind of forgets that I do agree with most of what he has to say most of the time.
Freddie's a good guy.
I just nitpick with those absolutes because I don't think there are any
Freddie's an
absolutes.
emotional guy like me. Freddie's an emotional guy like me.
He is. I love Freddie. And he does some really good work.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and he's been shedding a light on just how bad this situation is going to get for a long time.
He keeps a lot of track. He puts a lot of hard work into keeping track.
We need Freddie a lot because nobody else is really doing that work.
I'm glad he doesn't quit when he says he's gonna.
Well,
I think we all do that.
He quit doing his show because you know, he did 160 some shows.
Yeah.
And I can tell you after 11 that that's hard work. That, you know, it's tough to do, and to maintain that, and the level of emotion that he runs at. Like you say, you're an emotional guy, and so is Freddie. It's tiring, and it's hard to do, and it's hard to maintain, and he's got other things going on in his life.
Yeah.
And so I don't blame him for not doing his show anymore. The other thing he said about it to me recently is, you know, I banged my head for you know, I banged the drum for 160 some shows. You know, blah 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 blah. What good did it do?
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't changed things back to the way we want them yet. Yeah. But I still think it did a lot of good.
Sure, it educated a lot of people.
Yeah, and those shows are still there for people to watch. Yeah. And you know, he's inspired a lot of other people, and he's still on it. He's still on it. He's going to come on my show shortly here and tell us about
track of those dispensary raids and.
I mean, you know, where I've disagreed with pardon me, Freddie, and it, you know, it seemed to be the focus more of our disagreement than our agreement. That's why I say I don't think Freddie really understands that I agree with most of what he says, and I say that to him. But we get caught up in these little things where, you know, they're absolutely going to wipe everything. There is no hope, and we're never going to win this, and it's just always going to be LP,
feel that way sometimes.
And it's always going to be high priced, and he might be right. He might be right. But, you know, we got the city of Vancouver to pass this motion to allow for low barrier access to cannabis, and that means cheap cannabis. Yeah. And it's to offset the opioid crisis and address the opioid crisis, which isn't going away anytime soon. No. So we are allowed, by licensing from our city government, to distribute medical quality cannabis, because that's all you would give people that are in, you know, you wouldn't give them anything less than that. I mean, most of the people involved in the opioid crisis are suffering numerous types of other medical issues. That's what drives a lot of it. So you would give them absolutely good quality medical cannabis, and low barrier means they get it for free if they can't afford it, paid for by the government. They get it on a sliding scale to a point where they can afford it, and then they get it at a reasonable price from there.
The amount of money the government could save by just handing out free cannabis all day.
Yes, absolutely.
There'd be less jail time. There'd be less addicts.
Less
more happy
dependent
people.
on the medical and the legal. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, just think of that.
So that's what we're fighting for, and I believe we're going to get it. I believe anybody on disability is going to get cannabis paid for by taxpayers, and that's going to save us a whole ton of money, and we're going to be a better society because of it. And I think that has to happen because it's the right thing, and they've got to stop putting profits over people and recognize what's right and wrong in this world. And if we keep holding their feet to the fire, then we can get that. So the city's going to allow for that. They're going to also have to allow for high-dose edibles, because anything less than that does not combat or address the opioid crisis. And we're going to have dispensaries in Vancouver, I promise you, shortly, that will be selling cannabis, good quality medical cannabis in all of its different forms, right up to high-dose edibles, at prices that people can afford. And we're going to shake up that legal regime, whether we like it or not. We're going to have a few
different dispensaries opening up here for a few different things here real soon. And
yes.
I'm real excited about that.
Yeah, just briefly, I'll give it a couple more minutes here. Thank you. You've got there's mushroom dispensaries that have been allowed in Vancouver because a councillor tried to quash them from being allowed.
Right.
And in bringing that motion forward, of course, and having it defeated, opens the door.
And I believe they did say mushrooms and other psychedelics. They left that open a little bit.
And as they should.
As they should, yeah.
Should. And you've got something going on with that. I'll let you plug that a little bit.
Yeah, sure, I do. I got Microdelics. It's been insane.
Where's your box?
I didn't bring one today, sold out.
I see.
I had 125,000 people view that website in the last 3 days from all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you, Jerry.
You know, I've had to turn almost every single one of them down. You know, they're not from Canada. You know, some don't want a medical use. Or we can trade up there. But and it's a real, it's it's real off timing to start and do something that's like this, with the trial going on and stuff too. But I just don't think that people can wait, or that they deserve to wait to be healthier, or have that opportunity to better their mental health, or their creativity, or their spiritual health,
emotional health.
So the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference is coming up in a couple of days.
It starts on Friday.
Yeah, Lawrence is flying in tonight. Cherniak did the hash books. Yeah, he's coming in and I'm picking him up. He's going to be there too. But he went and stayed at my resort in Peru.
Right.
So he's doing comparison to ayahuasca for my retreat, to DMT, to LSD, and all these sort of things. So I guess, so we're going to go over that in the next couple of days. And then the Spirit Plant Conference is coming up. And I'm trying to do something I'm trying to reach out to some people there in UBC and see what they can do to help too with the LSD and magic mushrooms and things like that, because there's a lot going on there. They have a psychedelics community there and work going on. So hopefully I've got a couple of responses here. So on Sunday I'm going to see
help
one
move
of
us
them
towards the world that we deserve to have.
Yeah, for sure.
So nothing new on your case coming up until you get a court date. We've got the other ones that went on. We're waiting to see final arguments in February for Sarah McNeil's case.
Yeah.
And she wants people there, by the way. If you're anywhere near, where is it, Red Deer?
They're in Airdrie, I think, but Court. I think that's where they
gotta
live.
Get this right.
Court might be in Red Deer.
She told me where it was.
Court's probably Red Deer, I would think.
I think so too, but I want to just make sure, because I want to get that right, because she needs to have people there.
Yeah, she's got a little child that takes cannabis. That's got all kinds of sort of problems there. You know what I mean? It's just horrible what they're doing to them.
Hey, cut that out. Dude, it is in Red Deer. So it's in Red Deer. It'll be in February. Stay tuned here for dates, or look them up. We want to have that courtroom packed, and there's a real good reason to have that court. She's challenging him on Section 5 and Section 7, and those closing arguments, I'm sure, will be very entertaining as well, and something to really get behind and support. So that's coming up. Chris Enns has his thing in Halifax. He says there's a couple of weeks now before a decision likely.
Really?
And the judge, I'm going to get his name wrong, right? Yeah, I don't think I have it down there. But the judge in the case, Allen's could be his name.
It's on his Facebook.
It is on his Facebook.
It is on his Facebook.
And feel free to write him a letter and tell him how you feel about people not having access to what they deserve medically with respect to cannabis in Halifax.
Feel free to write my crown.
So thanks, Jerry. Thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you again next week.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Neil.
Have as much fun as you can. I guess I'll stay here. Ah, man, coming up on the show, I'm so honored to have as my guest Chris Bennett, the author of many great books, The Soma Solution, the first one, Sex, Drugs, and Violence in the Bible, Green Gold, The Tree of Life. Chris Bennett, how you doing? No further introduction, man. Just want to get right into it. And we've known each other for a very long time.
Long time, brother.
And I know that your life experience has been synchronistic and brought you to here today. And it started on the west coast of British Columbia here, and you go from there. Tell us what happened to you, the vision that you had.
Sure. People often ask me how I became the cannabis and religion expert, and a cannabis activist. And it goes back to late 1989, and I had this very powerful religious experience that set the course of the rest of my life. And like a lot of, I think, religious experiences and powerful psychedelic experiences, it was a combination of the substance, but also certain events, or a set and setting, if you like. In my case, the set and setting was a series of synchronistic events, I guess. The first of these, and it's a problem that faces us today, was when the Mount Cashel orphanage thing had happened on the East Coast. And for the first time, they were talking about Catholic priests abusing children. And I wasn't really brought up with religion. My mom was more of like the horoscopes and tea leaves type of person. But culturally, I kind of identified with Christianity, with all the holidays and the, even movies, even scary movies and stuff. Permeates our culture. And so I just kind of took it as a given when I was a kid, that was the case. And so I had thought, I thought the Bible was about something else completely different. That's kind of weird that these guys preaching it.
Before I read your book.
These guys preaching it. What the hell is going on there? And I bought a Bible, And I started reading it, and I just could not get into it. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and yada, yada. And I tossed it. I was working at that time in a fish plant out in the west coast of Vancouver Island in Ucluelet, a few nights a week. I was a surfer and grew a bit of weed, and I had this job a few nights a week as a night watchman. And I tossed it in the office there and forgot about it. And then
The Bible.
The Bible, yeah.
I want to just interject there a little bit with a moment of my experience on that, is that I was born into a Christian home. We went to Mount Pleasant Baptist up here when I was a little boy, and had that experience. And I had read the Bible by force. It was part of our Bible studies, and I would have to read so many chapters
Child abuse,
at night.
I think.
And I did that. I read that whole thing. I also read it again with a little more of an open mind, I thought. And then at 16, I had an experience walking down the road where I just went, my mom and dad are wrong. All that stuff is bullshit. And I don't know what's right or wrong, but it ain't what they're telling. And they're not lying. They just believe it, but it ain't true. And I got to find out what's true for me. And I didn't read the Bible again until I read your book. And then I read it alongside as a companion. And holy shit. Anyway, just wanted to say this.
Okay,
Yeah.
where was I? That's your story.
You had thrown the book in the cabin, and you hadn't thought much and didn't think much more about it for a while.
In the night watchman's office.
That's right.
And then coinciding with this, were some other things that took place. The logging of the last coastal rainforest, the Clayoquot Sound, was taking place. And I'd grown up logging. My brother was a camp chairman for the Loggers Union. I'd worked in sawmills. My wife's family at that time was loggers and stuff. And there was all of a sudden this huge controversy around the logging that had not been there before. And environmentalists were showing up from all over the world. And this was really like, whoa, I didn't even realize this was an issue,
Right.
And then I found out that a friend of mine taped this documentary of industrial hemp. Now, at this time, even the word hemp had been forgotten. I smoked cannabis for years before this and had never even heard this word hemp. And he says, oh, you can make all your paper out of cannabis and all your fuel and all your... And I was like, no. I know everything there is to know about marijuana. This can't possibly be true. And then he showed me this documentary, and I was like, wow. And at that time in Canada, all grow books, high times, all that stuff, bongs, all illegal. $150,000 fine for promoting marijuana. And so I looked it up in encyclopedias, and sure enough, there was this whole aspect to hemp that I didn't know. And I thought, well, this is kind of an answer to what these problems are. And then coinciding with this, another problem that still faces us today, because this is where the whole Mideast problem really broke open, was the Gulf War in Iraq. And I read this book on Saddam, and it was about, it said that because he had fired the Scud missile into Israel, they were comparing him to Nebuchadnezzar, the last king of Babylon, who in the Bible overthrows the Jews, right? And I knew about this, and so one day I'm sitting in this fish plant about 3 a.m, smoking a joint, and I'm reading a newspaper. And there's an ad for a sermon, and it was Pat Robertson, Revelations 18, the fall of Babylon. And there's Robertson at the pulpit, and behind him are tanks and jets. And I'm like, whoa, these guys are tying in the book of Revelation with this Gulf War in Iraq. And I've seen The Omen when I was a kid, and there's Jehovah's Witnesses in the fish plant, so I was kind of pumped for Revelation. I thought, well, I'm going to read the book of Revelation right now. And I picked it up and I open it, and the beginning of the story, John, he's given this scroll, he puts it in his mouth, it tastes as sweet as honey. And it turns bitter in his stomach, and he begins to prophesy. And I'm like, what did this guy eat? And I get a little further on, and it talks about them wearing sackcloth. And they were given much incense to offer, and the incense had the prayers of the saints and the billowing clouds of incense. And I was like, this is kind of trippy. And I got to the end of the Bible, and this is where I have my religious experience. Verse Revelation 22, and it says, on either side of the river of life stood the tree of life, bearing 12 manners of fruit, yielding its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And I swear to you, when I read that, I felt like light just poured into my being, and that this was a revelation about cannabis hemp and all its multiple fruits, how we could, replace fossil fuels with cannabis fuel, how we could stop cutting down trees for paper with cannabis, we can even make building supplies with cannabis, the most nutritious source of food, protein, most digestible.
Jack Harry came up with 50,000 different uses.
Yeah. So, and I was like, well, and these leaves are for the healing of the nations, and, here I am now, 4 books later, working on my 5th book, And I'm quite convinced that it is the tree of life. It is for the healing of the nations. And when you take a look through the history of this plant and how it's affected different cultures and the way that it's played, it's pretty identifiable as that.
Oh yeah, there's no question in my mind, of course, in all of our minds we understand this. It has been forbidden for us and hidden knowledge for a very long time. And it's such a dichotomy, such a weird, complex, twisted thing, where cannabis is the tree of life. It's this amazing thing. And even in the first chapter of the Bible, it talks about the seed-bearing herbs are very good and they're for everyone. Yet here we have in the 16th century, the Catholic Church deciding that anybody who had knowledge of herbs was a witch and should be burned.
Yeah, well, the Catholic Church has a pretty harsh history. There is this famous claim about the Pope putting out a papal bull in 1494 condemning cannabis use as a devil's sacrament. Unfortunately, that's bullshit. I went back and I found the original Latin of it, and other people have looked at it. It doesn't say that, so it's not quite clear. But it is clear that the church was against cannabis, and they
did start saying
things like that. But that papal bull is quite identifiable. There's one big tractate by one famous witch hunter of how the sinners like cannabis, and they're all twisted like the roots, and blah blah blah, and goes on and on comparing the sinner to cannabis. So it's quite identifiable, and certainly. Like even in the New Testament, the root for this actually takes place in Revelation. And I should point out, even though I had my religious experience about cannabis being the tree of life and reading the Bible, I don't believe in the Bible. I think that, when you really understand the role of cannabis and the origins of religion, it's as much a threat to fundamental religion as Darwin's theory of evolution was to the myths of Genesis and creation and Adam and Eve and all that. Yeah. Because what it really shows is the plant-based shamanic origins of religion, like John's revelation from ingesting psychoactive substances, or in the case of Moses, and this brings us to the burning bush. God first appears to Moses in flames of fire from within a burning bush. Back in the 30s, Sula Bennett, an anthropologist and etymologist, identified this Hebrew word cannabosum and said this was a reference to cannabis, and it appears in the Old Testament a number of times. And her claim was that when the Old Testament texts were translated out of Hebrew into Greek and then Latin and then English, a mistranslation took place identifying this as calamus. Should be pointed out that calamus itself is psychoactive, so whatever we're talking about here either way is a psychoactive preparation. And in the story...
Do you think it was just a mistake, or do you think there might have been something more insidious?
I think that you're dealing with, a lot of different plants and names and translations, and not everybody's a botanist, and these weren't, easily accessible things, you know what I mean? Even in the Bible...
So you don't see a conspiracy behind that?
I'm not saying there isn't, but, you have to, I can't identify and say that there was, you know what I mean? It could have been a conspiracy. It could have been,
know what happened.
Yeah, hard to know what happened. There's this translation, right? And what Sula Bennett, and I should point out, there's no relation here. She wasn't at all.
Other than we're all humans.
Other than we're all humans, brothers and sisters.
Yes, we are.
And she showed the later terms of cannabis in the Hebrew language, like cannabis, and traced those back, showing that they developed out of this earlier term, cannabosum. And then as well took a look at neighboring countries' contemporary names for cannabis, like Asia and Syria, Kanabu, which is very phonetically similar to cannabosum, and used it in an identical way in a religious ceremonial setting, part of the sacred rites.
Something like stinky cane or something.
Yeah, fragrant cane. Yeah, fragrant cane. Yeah. And so in the story of Moses, when you throw in cannabis to this translation, the burning bush commands Moses to make this holy anointing oil with about 9 pounds of cannabis mixed in with some myrrh and cinnamon and cassia into about 1.5 gallons of olive oil. And olive oil is a very good carrier.
Exodus 30:23.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and olive oil is a very good carrier for THC. And every time that Moses is to speak to the Lord, he covers himself in this oil, and he also places some of the oil on the altar of incense, and then he speaks to the Lord on the pillar of smoke over the altar of incense. And the Lord is identified by the pillar of smoke. It's called the Shekinah and represents the physical presence of God inside what is called the tent of the meeting, this enclosed teepee-like structure, little tent-like structure that holds in all the smoke.
Yeah, I've seen those. It just boggles my mind. I'm embarrassed. Like I said, I read the Bible twice, I thought, before I read it in companion with your book. And I had never read it before, really. I had never noticed all of that stuff, and it's really right there.
Yeah.
For anybody who wants to go looking for it. God is an angry, jealous, mean son of a...
I think the vast majority of people that believe in the Bible have never read the Bible.
Have never really
We've all
read
got
it.
this Cecil B. DeMille kind of Ten Commandments kind of view of it
that's
been
this
glossed
chapter
over.
Or this verse. But
It represents about this much of the Bible.
Right. And the other stuff that's in there is just shocking.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's brutal.
shocking.
It's hate literature. It'd be considered hate literature.
Well, certainly
if it
the
was
Old
written
Testament is hate literature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and Paul in the New Testament is
I
pretty
asked
brutal
my
as well.
mom about that, at the time, and she said, "Well, the New Testament is where they kind of corrected all of that. Like this, this all-knowing, almighty God gets corrected halfway through the thing. Same with the flood. Same with the
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah,
crazy shit. I didn't think we were going to get into this quite so early in our talk. How did the Urban Shaman come about? And tell us a bit about that.
Well, the Urban Shaman is a shop that's dedicated to sacred plants, and I've had that going since about 2001 or so. I think initially what happened is I was working for Mark with Pot TV, and one of the raids or many raids or trap fires or something that happened. I was out of work for a while and I had to come up with a way to make a living, and I had I'd learned a lot about these different plants from studying the history of shamanism in writing my books and stuff like that, and I thought somebody should be providing these plants. They're not exactly illegal, and so I started the Urban Shaman, and it's really all about my belief is that humanity has a natural right to the plants of the earth.
And the cacti.
Cacti and mushrooms and all these types of things.
Yeah.
And I wanted to pursue that as much as I could and stay open.
Exactly.
And so I found
Good
out
plan.
plants that
You've
weren't
had to,
scheduled.
And you've had to actually eliminate some products over time as
Yeah.
they become illegal.
Yeah, stuff like Salvia divinorum and stuff, which I was never very fond of, but
I
felt
don't like it very
obligated
much
to
as a drug
provide.
myself, but I
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
don't like that a government would say that it's not available to somebody.
Absolutely.
Because that is definitely a powerful entheogen.
Yeah.
And it might not be exactly what suits my particular being, but it certainly could be something that suits some other person's personal being.
Absolutely.
And it is nobody's right to tell any of us adults what we can and cannot ingest into our bodies.
No, this is like a form of religious persecution. People have been using these plants for millennia, going back thousands of years. Archaeology is pretty clear out of it. Yeah, we have receptor sites in our bodies. That's why these things work on us.
That's right.
It's direct religious experience. As opposed to something that's told in a book, you know what I mean? And that's the real threat of these things to establishment religions.
It does threaten establishments and religions.
Yeah.
It certainly does, and you can see the efforts that they've put into it. We look at why would they have prohibition when it's so costly, and we have all these different things. Well, it costs here, it costs here, it costs here, but there was a little scene with Nixon, I believe, where he sat there and said, "Well, we can't have these young people sitting around and smoking weed and thinking about things."
Yeah. Reagan, he said when he was a senator, was these young people, they get together, they read books, they smoke marijuana,
Yeah, that's
and
a
they talk.
horrible impersonation by me. I should never have even started it, but what can I say? But yeah, exactly that. It really does threaten the established way of thinking. And the established way of thinking has us extremely brainwashed.
Yeah, absolutely,
We
man.
are sound asleep here, walking through, buying all these things that that were advertised to us and that we need.
Oh, it's
because
all
they tell
imprinted to us through
need.
things like Christmas and stuff like
Oh.
that. As kids, we're looking through the Sears catalog. I want that, and that, and if I don't get that, well, there's going to be hell to pay, and it's
man.
like a recipe for this consumer society that we
A
live in.
recipe for the brainwashing that's been
Yep.
going on for all this time. And the powers that be are very aware of it, and they're very aware of how to manipulate us and all of this stuff. This particular holiday coming up in a couple of days really astonishes me, by the way. I mean, everything is sugar-based, and I get that, and so the sugar companies have really pushed to have all of these holidays be as as big as they can so kids consume sugar.
Yeah.
But sugar is a drug, and it's a
Yeah,
pretty serious drug, and it affects kids in quite serious ways. It affects all of us. It's especially this refined sugar. I mean, sugars are the food that we eat. It's the fuel that we use.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
in all the fruits and vegetables. I'm talking about the refined sugar, when they take that one taste ingredient out of there and put it into everything, that shit's in everything, so that we will be addicted to it and just, so that sugar gets these holidays going. But this holiday is the one where we gather our kids together in gangs, we get them to dress in scary costumes, and go door to door pounding on the doors and demanding a trick or a treat. Give me my fix, or I'm gonna fuck your house up. Like,
it's like the purge.
What are we thinking?
The sugar purge.
Like, really, we are indoctrinating our kids since they're tiny into this ritual of, this is something you can do. So, I don't know what to think of this, but we live in a very mixed up and upside down world. And I talked about how the Catholic Church has twisted it so far that, from being this herb-bearing seed or herb-bearing plant that is good, seed-bearing herb. Yeah, man, I just smoked a bit of weed there. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Seed-bearing herb that is good for everyone and very good, to being this thing that requires people to be burned if they're caught with it or having understanding of it, and on that corruption goes. The roots of the shamanistic, which really go through so many different cultures. Tell us the beginnings of that, as best you know.
The roots of the shamanistic. Well, shamanism is like a pretty broad term. My particular interest is, plant-based shamanism. The use of
shamanism being the understanding of
like it'd be like a witch doctor in a tribe. That solves the tribe's problems.
The understanding of
the spirit.
The spirit, things in the plants.
Yeah. And so
and it crosses all cultures, doesn't it?
They're the communicator between the tribe and the other, like the consciousness of a tribe. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as we came into consciousness out of being like animals into reflective consciousness, shaman played a very important role.
There's no shamanism going on amongst primates, is there?
Not that I'm aware of, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some early signs of it in chimpanzees. Certainly ritual for burial and stuff like that.
Berries and which leaves,
yeah. Oh, that they kind of instinctually know. Instinct's another thing.
Isn't that the root of it?
Instinct is a different thing altogether, but it's a fascinating thing, I think, when it comes to consciousness. But in regards to shamanism, there's this whole idea that I've been very attracted to by this psychologist Julian Jaynes, and in his book, The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, he says that ancient man didn't think like we think, have this interior dialogue going on in their head. They were more the victim of circumstance, hungry, find food, danger, hide, reaction, And that thinking takes place in a different area of the brain than language. You can have language without having elements of higher thinking, like I think, therefore I am. Right. Animals communicate with yips and yelps and howls and whistles and things like that, and it's almost like a basic form of language.
And
doesn't mean they're having deeper
have
thoughts.
Very little understanding of their own being in the moment.
Yeah. They're all just kind of present in the present.
Whatever happens.
And Jane said that the first people that experienced thought, this was like experience, much like a schizophrenic can experience thought as a voice coming from outside of them, They didn't locate the voice talking to them inside their head, so that in times of stress or upheaval, maybe the voice of their father or the chief of the tribe would come through, and they'd be like, oh, I hear, it says to do this, And in religious texts, the most ancient sorts of texts, say from Assyria and Mesopotamia, there's what is called tutelary deities. And they actually represent your ability for forethought, planning ahead, and things like that. And there's even elements of this left in language. Terms like genius comes from the same root as genie. Inspiration has, elements of, something coming from within you. And the ancient Greeks, they talked about the things, almost aspects of consciousness, their gods and stuff like that. And
do you have a sense of where the ability to control fire came into this stream of where
Oh
consciousness
yeah,
is
you
at.
know, I'm sure that was a big step, no doubt about it. You know, gave man control over their environment. I don't know, you know,
That was a
I
pretty
don't really,
interesting step
with
when they
relate,
figured out
but
that, you know-
horseback riding was thought to have been influenced by the development of hemp ropes. And the people
Right.
that developed horseback riding, the Proto-Indo-Europeans of the Sredeni Stog, I think out in the Ukraine region, they were also early burners of cannabis. The oldest evidence we have of cannabis being consumed in some sort of ritualistic context is allegedly out of the Ukraine region from about 5,500 years ago in the form of polypod bowls that were, according to archaeologist Andrew Charette, that were used to burn cannabis in a sort of ritual setting.
I think that cannabis would have been a premier fuel for those that understood how to create fire.
Yeah, well, we can only speculate that sort of stuff. You know what I
it's
mean?
speculation, and I understand that you're a
yeah.
researcher and a historian.
Well, you know, like I
But
do
it
speculate,
just makes sense to me that when they were starting to figure out how to make fire, it would have been, well, we can make a spark that'll catch, and so we need something dry to catch. And there, you know, cannabis, because evidenced by our endocannabinoid system, goes back a very, very, very long way. And those dried buds with those those sticky crystals would have been pretty quick to catch fire, I think. So to me, I've always thought, I mean, I'm not a researcher and I don't know, and maybe you can be found out, but it's a long, long way back
it's just
there.
like, it's just
But
not,
you
it's
spark
not,
the fire.
it's not the type of thing that you can kind of prove or really like make a
Right.
case with for archaeology unless they had like, fire pits and they looked at the carbon in the fires from the agent. Oh,
Maybe
it's
they can
cannabis,
find
you know.
that,
Yeah, well, they do
They
find
find lots
things.
of weird things.
They, recently
Yeah.
they found braziers in China from 2,500 years ago that were clearly used for burning cannabis. They found the cannabis
That's
stuff.
not very long ago.
That's not very long ago, but it's the first evidence of high THC cannabis. Like just because something is found archaeology, that doesn't mean that's the date set in stone.
No.
But that's the oldest we can say for that based on archaeological finds. Now, this find of 2,500 years ago is found with an Indo-European group that was living in China. That means like Caucasian type of people. But we know that these were other Indo-European groups like the Scythians. There's older evidence of cannabis burning braziers from the Scythians, but it wasn't the same high THC variety that was, or at least they didn't test. Maybe they tested enough to see if it was cannabis, but then in those days they didn't have the tests to identify the THC levels, or the remains weren't quite there enough. Whereas this stuff in China, they can tell it's female cannabis buds, high THC variety, and they found other finds with this same culture, the Gushi culture, which is an Indo-European culture that was in central China from about 2000 BC to about 400 BC when the Han Chinese chased them out of the area. But they found, 2 pounds of female flowers, almost perfectly preserved.
Are the Scythians the ones that we think first really embraced cannabis and used?
Well, like the Scythians are generally credited with spreading it out of the ancient world. They are, descended from the same kind of culture that I was talking about in Ukraine there that initially domesticated the horse, or was thought to have domesticated the horse. And it's the Scythians were nomadic and horseback riding. And so one of the ways that we can tell about the spread of cannabis, coming from Indo-European influences is through etymology, the study of the origins of words and stuff. And cannabis, the root for cannabis, comes from one of the oldest forms of word rootstock. It's actually Proto-Indo-European. So before the term canna was in the Indo-European language, there was already this other word in this Proto-Indo-European language, right? And that word, canna, in the Indo-European language is the same root word for chanvre in French, for cannabis in Dutch. It was Dutch cannabis,
Yeah,
that.
permeated into a lot of
And
different languages.
bong in India, and banga in Persia, and all these words shot off out of that original root word with that an in the middle is what the etymologists talk about. And you can tell it spread throughout the world because of these different words and how it got there, and the influence of
So
Indo-European
there's
cultures.
also artifacts that date back longer than that show gifts to the pharaoh or whatever of
The oldest evidence we've got is in the form of tools that were used for breaking apart hemp fibers. And according to Elizabeth Whalen Barber, who's the foremost expert on ancient textiles, tools used for breaking the fibers of hemp go back 28,000 years, right?
Right.
Then there's examples of a hemp rope, 25,000. Well, with the Egyptians, it's different. There's the Egyptian word for it, shemshemet, but it's not identified as an incense. It's usually a topical lotion or ropes and stuff like that.
Pictographs depict
well, there's pictographs
gifts of what look like nice
cannabis.
buds.
There's like the famous image of Sekhmet with a cannabis leaf, and there's an actual reference to shemshemet in the literature around Sekhmet. And it has to do with a rope ladder to the heavens. Now, it's not directly identified as an incense, but it's like a lot of these things are sacred and secretive.
They found some cannabis in some tombs that date back thousands
Well, we
of
found
years.
like cannabis with mummies, not 8,000. Well, not 8,000 years, no.
No, I just said thousands.
Oh, thousands years. I think I said 8,000 years.
No.
But 3,000. BC even.
And what they would have been associated with would have been sort of psychoactive or medical uses or spiritual uses?
Like in the Egyptian references, it's less clear, but in other, like textual references, say like in the Zoroastrian accounts, it's quite clearly identified by name, banga, and it's usually ingested in a way like very potently, infused into wine, and then you drink a number of cups of these infused wines, and you can get quite a powerful extract.
Incense, I'm sure, in a lot of different countries.
Well, I would say that the account in Exodus 30:23 is incense. He's got to put it into oil, but he's burning it on the incense altar. Clearly, in Assyrian references, it's an incense. And with the Scythians themselves, what they would do is they would heat up rocks, and then they had a little teepee-like structure. They'd throw the rocks in a bronze brazier, and they put the brazier inside the tent and then throw cannabis on the rocks and inhale the fumes by sticking their head inside the tent, and it captures the fumes, right? So that's basically burnt, definitely numbers of people like Dr. David Hillman says that Agent Myrrh was often mixed with cannabis resins and burnt as an incense, and other elements like that, for sure. So definitely it's been burnt as an incense in the ancient world.
It's been a real big part of life on this planet,
Absolutely.
human life on this planet for a very long time.
Absolutely.
And
Carl Sagan speculates that it was humanity's first agricultural crop.
Cannabis itself.
Yeah, hemp. Hemp. People like now we identify hemp with industrial hemp, and cannabis is somehow separate. People should know that the term hemp was like kind of a blanket term like cannabis in the English language. In fact, the term Indian hemp was come up by Dr. Robert Hooke, one of the founding members of the Royal Society, and it was to distinguish the varieties that they were starting to see coming in from India from the local European varieties, which to them seemed quite inert and no psychoactive properties. Just such low levels of THC.
Like the Indian hemp.
The Indian hemp you could have, and so he started that kind of term to separate hemp from Indian hemp, and then this led to cannabis and sativa and cannabis
Cannabis
indica.
was more a pharmacological term that was used in.
Well, it's a Latin, it goes way back.
A big part of our.
It goes
way
way back. Hemp's like from English hanap, which
Did
is
you
like.
see the old medicine bottles from the 1800s that say cannabis on them?
Yeah.
And so it was definitely used, in medical terms for sure. Cannabis actually goes back a lot farther than that in the United States. It was around 1619, I believe, where they made a declaration that anybody getting land from the federal government had to grow cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get taxes and stuff like that. Same here in Canada.
And that wasn't for medicinal uses. It was more for industrial
Yeah,
uses.
yeah.
The new forming colonies, had to rely on these types of things. That's why there was Johnny Appleseed as well.
Absolutely.
Because apples were really important.
There's kind of a Johnny Appleseed of medical marijuana in America. A lot of people don't know about this guy who I'm a real fan of. His name was Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph, and he was a African American man who during the Civil War era in the 1850s was traveling around with his Native American healer wife, Mary Jane Randolph, peddling a variety peddling a variety of cannabis medicines in the Old West from town to town, And he's, as far as I can tell, the first identifiable personality really pushing the whole medical marijuana thing. He was also a mystic and America's first Rosicrucian Grand Master, and he used cannabis for mirror scrying, for seeing visions in mirrors, and that's a practice in magic that goes back, at least into the 16th century. At least in the 16th century. There's two magical grimoires, Sefer Raziel, Liber Salomonis,
And a grimoire is a
magic book
of
magic
these
spells
things,
and
right?
magic techniques.
Right.
And the other one's the book of invocations or spells and invocations, I think it's called. It's been re-released under the name of, it escapes me right now, the Prince of Fairies there. Anyways, it's been re-released. And in both of those texts, there's recipes for cannabis used with another plant and two different plants in the two different accounts for seeing visions in magic mirrors. And this was a pretty interesting practice. And
What makes the mirror magic?
Well, it's like
So
the
not
magic.
just any mirror would work?
Well, they were usually using. You could just use a glass of water if you wanted, but usually they use these black, opaque, obsidian mirrors, right? And the idea was,
mirror, you mean?
yeah, like just very, very black, just so black that there's almost not even a reflection in it, right?
Right.
And you just stare into that until you start to see visions. And it's a kind of a way of, I think, bringing out the subconscious or unconscious mind that tells us our dreams at night, and projecting it back out into another way of interacting,
That's a nice way to think about it.
And I think that's a lot to do with cannabis, is that it's what it does is it affects the subconscious or unconscious. One of the more common things that people that use a lot of cannabis report is a reduction in dreaming. And
That's true, because when I stop using cannabis, my dreams get pretty vivid.
Yeah. And then I've also noticed this other phenomena. A few times I've gotten up at 4:30 in the morning, can't get to sleep, smoke a joint, go back to sleep.
That's all?
Anywhere. And have the most intense dreams I ever had, And so I started looking into this, and apparently cannabis causes a spike in melatonin. And melatonin is directly related to reading. And through this, it can affect the pineal gland, actually. And there were studies done in the 80s, unfortunately there hasn't been anything more recently done, where they found that, smoking a joint, if you test the melatonin levels 15 minutes after, they're like 1,000 times higher than they're supposed to be. And so I think that what cannabis kind of does is brings an esoteric element into your daily life when you're using it, rather than just having it come out at night and interact with you. And the whole identity of the unconscious and the subconscious actually originated with people studying cannabis, like Dr. J.J. Moreau, one of the founders of the Club de Hashishin. He thought that what cannabis was doing was mimicking what was insanity, and also when people dream at night and have visions and dreams and stuff, right? And he thought this had something to do with it, and then this led to the study of it and the identification.
So the Hashishins, a group that existed...
Oh, like 11th century, 9th to 11th century, 12th century, they were like, founded by Hassan I-Sabah, the old man of the mountain.
Academics?
Oh, mystics, I guess they were very learned. I guess they'd be academics of that age, like
that's
some
how
of them.
They saw themselves.
It was a hierarchy. So there's, the lower down people, the more battling.
But they were
guys.
striving to be,
They were definitely very religious.
Humans.
The story from Marco Polo is that the old man of the mountain, Hassan I-Sabah, would get new converts and then drug them with hashish, and they'd wake up in this beautiful garden with nymphs all around and streams flowing with wine, and then they'd drug them again and say, now that you've seen paradise, you'll follow me. But that's probably more of a westernized propaganda against them, and they weren't particularly well loved in the Islamic world either. They were considered heretics by most of fundamentalist Islam, right? But it's more likely that the cannabis was used in a more mystic way, and the way that they were using it is actually they come from the Persian region, and it's very similar to the way the Zoroastrians I mentioned earlier were using it. They get infused in wine, take a drink, they see visions of the afterworld, same sort of thing. The only difference is the cultural view, so they see paradise with all the virgins and stuff of the Islamic paradise, whereas Zoroastrian afterworld was more in tune with their own cosmology, right? But it's the same experience basically, and it comes from that same region. And we know the Ismaili, which the Hashishin kind of sprung out of, were deeply influenced by the Persian religion, Zoroastrian religion. A lot of that stuff filtered into Islam in that area. So
there was a fair amount of imbibing of lots of different things.
I think that when you take a look at cannabis in history, and you see to realize.
I don't mean cannabis. I mean into wine and these other things that they were involved with as well. Alcohol became an issue, and
already it was an issue in Islam. It's specifically prohibited
Because of
Quran.
issues that they had a couple hundred years ago and more. And
well, much longer. This is
much
like,
longer,
the time of
I'm
Muhammad,
sure.
in the Quran, whereas cannabis is not specifically mentioned, and that's why there was more leeway with cannabis products than with the alcohol use in the Islamic world. And cannabis has enjoyed periods of freedom in the Islamic world and also periods of extreme prohibition. I think that in the 19th...
There's extremes to it,
Yeah,
and Muslims come in, very extremes and moderate.
Well, just like Christians as well.
Of course,
Extremes and moderates,
absolutely.
yeah.
So even today, there's some that would accept it and it can be fine, and there's other extremists that would think.
Well, I don't think there's any Islamic countries where cannabis is legal that I'm aware of, but certainly there has
Now,
been.
when you say, I don't think so either, but that includes the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia,
all those type of places, yeah, it's pretty strictly prohibited. There's still a thriving
There's a fair
cannabis
amount of opium
culture in
involved
places
there.
like Lebanon and Egypt, and these things are still around, but they're prohibited. And
Lots-
a lot of that's
lots of
from
opium.
the colonial days, like in India as well. The prohibitions that exist are largely due to colonial influences.
Right.
And before that, it wasn't. And they were trying to appease the Europeans and European interests, right?
So I'm told that in the Middle East, in Iran, Iraq, and places, the opium is really available. It's easy, it's cheap, and most of the people, or lots of people, are doing it. Cannabis, on the other hand, is not well understood and not available. Yet there's a growing desire for that. But how much does the religious leadership of those areas have to do with the availability of opium and the inavailability of cannabis?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or is it the DEA that's
Yeah,
doing
well,
all that?
I think, you got to take that, opium production went up in Afghanistan after America got in there, and...
Well, the British used to supply it to
There's a
China.
lot of variables at work. I don't know how much it has to do with religious leaders and stuff like that. There's a lot of other variables at work,
And
And there's a lot of, we're talking like, there's not
Now
like...
we're
there's
talking
not,
modern day. And
yeah,
your
and
expertise
there's
is in the
we're talking a
past.
broad area too, and different things
That's
are
true.
happening in different places. It's kind of hard to give blanket answers to something so
I
complicated.
mean, I just like it to be solved. I'd like them to start using cannabis and not opium. That's a very simplistic way of looking at things. And
Raw
sometimes-
opium is much better than heroin or morphine or fentanyl or anything like that. There wasn't the addiction problems with raw flower opium that there was with heroin and stuff like that. And these plants in these natural states, and I'll give the example of coca and cocaine here, as well. Coca is a very beneficial substance used for altitude sickness, can give you a lot of clean energy, but it has other alkaloids and elements in it that prevent you from taking it too far. And it's like sugar from the sugar cane, and when you take out just the sugar and you leave the rest of the sugar cane there, that's when you start to run into the problems. And that's
Right.
true of a lot of these substances.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm an advocate for the legalization of plants. I don't want to fight about things like crack cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine, but I can get behind the poppy. I
Sure.
can get behind ephedra as a plant.
Yeah.
I can get behind coca,
Yeah.
and I don't think that there's a plant that humanity doesn't have a natural right to, and I think the only thing that is a concern there is if something's endangered and making sure it's preserved,
Well, some plants are
for our
dangerous.
collective
That's
heritage.
for damn sure.
Well, they're definitely dangerous, and
some are deadly.
what I'm talking about requires personal responsibility. It doesn't,
Right.
give you a freedom to commit murder,
Oh, of course not.
but you need to know what you're doing and personal responsibility, and that's where we got to go instead of prohibition.
Well, just about all the house plants. There's about 100 different house
Oh,
plants. and
absolutely.
they're
Most
all-
of the deadly plants are perfectly legal. You can have them.
Oh, yeah. And then there's some that are really hallucinogenic, like datura, that you ought to be very careful with.
Absolutely.
If you take that. I mean, even mushrooms, I've had experiences, and I know other people had experiences where it wasn't good with mushrooms, but I've had really good experiences with mushrooms too. It's a matter of the set and the setting that you're going into and several other factors that are involved there. But I'm totally with you. People have a natural inherent right to access all of these things in nature. And if it doesn't work for one person in a way that they like, well, it might work for another person in a way that they like. And who's that person that gets to tell any other adult,
Absolutely.
that you can't pick a flower and chew on it if you want? I mean, if you're an adult and you know that flower is poisonous to everybody you've ever seen, and somebody grabs it and starts to put it in their mouth, well, go ahead and warn them, But I don't think you should really wrestle them to the ground and, put them in handcuffs, tie them up, and put them in a room somewhere or something, It's just so wrong, this imposition of other people and other groups, ethics or ideologies that are I mean, it's fucking the whole world up. It's what's made this mess that we have here right now, is a lot of that attempt to control other people's ingestion and what you can and cannot access to ingest. It's what drives me nuts. And when I read your books and I look and see how far back some of that stuff goes, you know, and it's a sad state of affairs. But I think that we're actually moving much more forward than backwards in this. There are forces trying to move us backwards and continue even more control and less access. But I'm hopeful in the way that I see a lot of different things happening for sure. And part of that is the emergence of the psychedelic respect or movement or whatever you will. It's Chicago is talking about allowing for mushrooms and psychedelics. Oakland is already, I think, past that.
Denver as well, yeah.
And Denver, and more talk about it all the time from respected sources. And Jerry's got his microdosing of LSD, which I think is a very good thing. In microdoses, you know, you can find out how it works for you and what have you. And mushrooms as well, with Dana and his mushroom thing. All of these things need to be available. Are you hopeful?
Well, you know, I look at what happened with cannabis, and I think we can learn a lot about what not to do and what we don't want, you know.
Right.
Stop
asking for legalize and regulate.
I think that I see an accelerated process happening with mushrooms and other psychedelic plants, ayahuasca, and these types of things in their cultural acceptance. And I think that could, and that's also translating into legislation, as we've seen in, you know, Chicago, Denver, and Oakland, you know. And I've started this group here in Canada, Messengers of Gaia.
Right.
And that's all dedicated to the sacred plants and humanity's natural right to them. We've been working on a petition we hope to see launched on the government website in the next while, dealing with that and pushing for that, you know. And I think the Vancouver City Council meeting with the mushrooms was a real indication of that there's growing acceptance and need for these things, you know. And I think in this time, in this age, man, as we sit here on the very precipice of destruction of the planet and our culture, that these plants are Mother Gaia giving us a wake-up call to what's happening. This is the voice of nature, you know, and that's a big part. Even the Extinction Rebellion, that's one of their mandates. It has to do with psychedelic plants and their ability to wake us from our sleep, you know.
I see. Yeah, we live in a yin and yang universe for sure, and there are forces on all sides of most things, and most things are dichotomies and very complex, and what's true on one side of an issue can also be true on the opposite side of an issue. And in this case, I see that there's powerful forces that, like you say, that the planet and the spiritual forces that seem to be awakening many of the humans, and there is a lot of dialogue about that going on, matted up against, you know, I call it the corporate forces, you know, of greed and profits over people that really continue to want to have us shut down and not be able to, you know, open ourselves up to the understandings that we're amazing human beings on this planet. We are all brothers and sisters. Love is the answer to most things, and if we all just cared about each other and this planet, well, then everybody could have a really wonderful life, and the billionaires and trillionaires don't need to exploit everybody with, you know, with their monopolies and the way that they do that. So that this awakening through the psychedelics is a very powerful thing at a very timely point, like you say, on the precipice, and yet here we have this you know, social media awakening for sure.
Yeah.
And more than that throughout the population, I think, as these things filter out to the mainstream, that you know, a lot of people are smoking weed now that wouldn't have considered it before.
Absolutely.
Because it's now a legal marketplace.
And, you know, it's changing, you know. We saw that with dispensaries, people from all walks of life, all ages coming in there, and these things become like almost like community centers.
I learned that on the Freedom Tours. The demographics of people that would be involved, that would come and talk to me when I was at a community meeting or something, blew me away. The school teachers that would come and say, well, nobody knows, can't tell my family or anything, but I really need cannabis to help me sleep at night, or so many other stories. And now these people are able to come out and talk about it because it's not illegal anymore. There's still stigmatization around it, but that's fading fast as the public understands the truth about it, not what the government's telling us about the still reefer madness going on, but, you know, the actual truth is people are getting together with edible parties and other, you know, topical parties and lots of things going on. It's part of weddings now. They've got weed bars at weddings, and, you know, I'm sure all the generations are now talking between themselves like they never did before about it. So it's really going to help a lot. So you've been putting together this place. You're fortunate to find a place that I don't know how to describe it, but when I pulled in there, I'm going to say the Soma Institute is a place that you've managed to obtain that is a retreat, a place to commune with nature. I visited it, as you know, you weren't there, but maybe what you don't know is when I pulled in the front yard right at 4:20 in the afternoon, I didn't even try. I mean, it's not like I stopped down the road and waited for 4:20 or anything. It was like I headed straight there. I'd been driving for hours and hours, and I arrived there at 4:19, met Mike coming up the driveway, and there were a herd of deer, like a family of deer, in the front yard chewing on the leaves that just stayed there and let us take pictures of them while we were there. I sparked up a joint right away and wished Mike a happy 420. But it's a magical place.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about what your plans are for it, what you think the future is for it.
Yeah, well, Soma Institute, is dedicated to the sacred plants. I chose Soma because it's, an ancient name that identifies a sacred libation that was psychoactive. There's debate about what it is. I've got my.
Oh, you got a real good book on that,
yeah,
the Soma Solution.
But the property itself is dedicated to humanity's relationship with the sacred plants and the preservation and culture. And so it's a little over 3 acres. There's a log house and 5 cabins.
You're going to be
teepee.
able to rent out to people.
Yeah. Well, like to be able to access it, you have to either know me or know somebody well that knows me.
Right.
And get a so it's not like I'm advertising.
That's not a very slim number of people that are going to want to go up there and stay. So you're probably going to have little trouble filling those spots.
And we make it available to people holding ceremonies, ceremonies, things like that, as well as individuals exploring these things. And then we have greenhouses where we're growing sacred cactus. We're planning on growing all sorts of sacred plants and having a kind of a nursery to provide them. We've got sacred Bufo alveros toads there, and big
a recreational,
25-foot teepee.
Recreational area with a beautiful outdoor hot tub.
Definitely a focus on spirit,
and a free-floating tank.
No alcohol allowed on site. Just sacred plants.
Right.
And some of these plants are not illegal. You could use peyote in Canada with no legal repercussions. Ayahuasca
what happens when you use
questionable.
Peyote? What's a typical peyote experience?
It's like, I don't know, if you've done other psychedelics, if you've done LSD.
I've done DMT and I've done LSD.
It's kind of like LSD mixed with ecstasy a little bit, MDMA.
Is it mescaline from my high school days?
Well, I don't know, like a lot of things that were called mescaline weren't actually mescaline back in those days, may have been. Right. I don't know.
We did do some of that.
Yeah, there was stuff around, but it kind of has... It's kind of like almost like a mix of the openness of the heart that you get from MDMA and then a psychedelic factor a lot like LSD. And it's a very powerful substance. It's been used by a lot of different indigenous cultures for ceremonial purposes. The Hopi, the Native American Church, other groups as well, right. Aztec Indians and stuff. And also by various occultists going back to Aleister Crowley. In fact, here in in Vancouver, we have a bit of a history of peyote that's kind of interesting. When I was working on Liber 420, I found out that this magician that was associated with Aleister Crowley, the famous British magician, in 1915, he opened the first Order Templi Orientis, a Masonic-like kind of quasi-Masonic lodge over in North Vancouver, and in 1915 they were doing peyote and writing about it in their things and keeping track of it. And this guy actually, I found out, lived like 3 or 4 doors from my home that I grew up in Deep Cove in North Vancouver.
Wow!
And I was right into cannabis as well. Crowley wrote an essay, "The Most Holy Grass of the Arabs," for the guy. So pretty crazy. And according to one guy, he was arrested right across the street from here in Victory Square in, I think, 1930. After doing some ritual around the center of the city. He must have been around the cenotaph. And then he was arrested naked, acting peculiarly. I was assuming he was tripping on peyote or something like that. And then had to talk himself out of there the next day. So that's a pretty little wild thing, considering I saw peyote in this building.
Yeah, Vancouver has quite a history with these things as well, being a port city as it is. It goes back a ways. Well, Chris... I can't thank you enough for coming on the program, and you've been such an inspiration to me and so many other people. I've loved your speeches over the years at different events that we've had. You're such a gem that we have here. We're so happy to have you. We need you. The books that you've written provide so much information, and if you didn't do it, I don't know, nobody would have, right? So your emotion, your religious, what's the word I'm looking for? That experience that you had, epiphany. The epiphany that you had led you to here, and everything in between. And there is no question about it. It is synchronistic and somehow driven by forces much greater than we understand.
And I want to point out to people, although I had like this religious experience, and that's what, you know, lit the fire that got me going, my books really take an anthropological perspective. They're more about things like written references in ancient texts, archaeological finds, and that sort of thing is generally what I go with to make my case. But it's identifiable in some of the world's oldest existing religions: Judaism, Christianity, Taoism, Sikhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism. You know, and you can find references at the inception of all of these religions that are wrangled up with cannabis, and it's a really fascinating history. And the more that you learn about it, I promise you, it throws a magic cloak on this herb that goes in with the smoke when you take it in.
And there's been a lot of misreports. There was a lot of like anti all of these things that ended up in, you know, the beliefs of the populace. And I'm really happy that that you had the inspiration to gather it all and find out what's right and what's wrong, because there's a lot of stuff in there that you say, well, you know, there's a bias here, and they you know, they were missing this and they were missing this, and you've put all this together and in a very interesting and succinct way that shows, really expressed to me, a lot of our combined history as humanity, and how we get to be what we are and who we are right now, and how far removed we are from, you know, our earlier roots. So I'm really happy that I know you. I'm really happy that you are who you are, and you've done what you've done with all of these amazing books. I highly recommend, if you want to get educated about the true history of your rights to access these amazing natural substances that are part of who we are, and that's why they give us the experiences they give us, is because we're all part of one living planet here, and it's a lot more than what we see just without the use of these vehicles and conduits to show us more. So thanks again, Chris. Thanks for coming on the show. I look forward to your next book, which is coming.
This one is called Aleister Crowley and the Herb Dangerous: A History of Drugs in Thelema. And so it kind of grew out of my last book. I had a big chapter on Crowley I had to pull out due to space, and it's like 777 pages already, you know.
And growing.
And growing. So that was this one was last one was 7.
Do you have a launch date for that?
It would be when I get to. It takes me years to write my books, you know.
Well, you got a little more time these days, and you got an institute to go up and hang around in, and maybe get some downtime to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing I don't think you mentioned about the institute was the institute itself. The big main building on the property is a pretty phenomenal place. With it's a log building with a fireplace and an old style kitchen and all kinds of beautiful areas to lounge around on couches and shelves full of books and other curios.
Well, it's just going to keep getting better now. You know, this was like the foundation year. We did a lot of, you know, I've worked hard, as well as my friend Mike Gittleman, who's been a friend of mine for 20 years. Job. And we've, you know, just done a lot of building and renovating over the last year. And now that that's done, now we're going to start filling it up with retreats and events. And
I think everybody that goes
building
there,
the inside of it.
Everybody that goes there will add a little more than they take away.
Yeah, we have a volunteer situation
and
where
not
people,
by necessity, but just because that's the type of people that are going to be there.
Yeah, we're
trying
to make it,
leave their mark on it in some way.
Make it not just a money thing, you know. So we offer people, if they come up and do 4 hours work, they can stay there for the night and access the facilities and stuff.
And it's a fabulous
we'll be putting in a deprivation tank in the spring there. We've got it up there already.
Is there snow there now?
There's just a bit of snow just starting.
It's getting cold, but it's still a nice place to be when it's cold.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you got that instant heat.
It's a mountaintop regime.
Great big old-fashioned bathtubs.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's a wonderful place. Thanks, Chris. We'll hopefully have you back on in a while when we get another chance. In the meantime, just have as much fun as you can changing the world, because that's what you're doing.
You as well. You're doing great work as well, brother. Very proud of you.
Somebody's got to do it, right? I also had an epiphany. I'm going to talk about a little bit as we move to the next segment here. So, we still got 3 minutes.
And here we got our holy rollers rolling again for Sunday. The last Sunday before Halloween. Looks like we got really good pot today. And we got our edibles here. Hopefully John will show up with his infused sandwich or whatever creation he makes today. It'll be nice. So these edibles are great.
We want to rent places we can operate.
Help all sorts of people.
That's the vision of the CSP, is to be a
And we're almost ready to go.
I'm going to take the drug war history tour to Ottawa. I'm going to tell the Prime Minister all about it.
Nice.
I'm back. So, yeah, CSP. We've had some wonderful times at the CSP the last 2 times since I saw you all. I want to give a shout out to our fabulous donators that make it all happen. The care packs were wonderful. The people are so appreciative. We really are making a difference. We really are helping people in their lives. And it doesn't work without the people that donate to our project. And they're all selfless. I don't have to ask anybody. They all just have been helping. They've taken some ownership of what we're doing there. And so I want to thank Move the Movement. Move the Movement has been with us for, I don't know, 2 years now, getting close. And their donation every time is phenomenal. And I would say at one of the main cores of us being able to help people the way we are. And also Dirty Dave, who gives us these canna caps that he makes with love and care of the best organic materials. And we get a few hundred of those. I think it's 250 now that he's giving us every time that we're there. The medicinal cannabis dispensary, they seldom get mentioned because they don't care to be mentioned and they don't want to ruffle feathers, but I don't know where we'd be without them, so I'm very pleased to have them. Weeds, Glass and Gifts started us out at the very beginning 2 years and 9 months ago with the donations we needed to get this program going and then sustain it. And intermittently throughout the last almost 3 years, we've had wonderful donations from them. We just got another one, and I can't thank them enough for helping make this program the success that it is. The 710 Studios have provided us again with lots of rolling papers for the Holy Rollers, because we give out about 400 or 500 joints every time we go there. That's because it's the cannabis edibles that really help people offset the use of opioids and the harder street drugs. Cannabis in its smoked form really isn't enough to do that, but the edibles are, because you can eat too much, and if you can eat too much, you can eat the right amount. And what the smoked cannabis does is it fills that void from, it takes about up to 45 minutes to an hour sometimes for the edibles to start working, because it's a different system of delivery going through your liver instead of your lungs. And the smoked cannabis goes through your lungs and is immediate, and therefore helps bridge that time between the edibles. So we give those to people, and they really appreciate that as well. The stock market, I think I'll leave them to last because I want to talk a bit about that. Black Creek, ever since 420 of last year, has just been amazing in helping our bakers get what they need to put together amazing baked goods for people. And it's amazing quality product that we get from them, and I can't thank them enough, as they've now become one of our main donators as well. Somewhere in Neverland is another donator this past couple of weeks, and has been before, and a very caring person there that wants to help with what we're doing. We have an anonymous gummy maker and an anonymous wrecked crispy squares maker this past Sunday, and John Murray, who has become an integral part of our project and takes it upon himself to bake up good wholesome food for people, although he had cake and candies as well as his pizza on Sunday. But all with the best intentions, and all actually what people need, because even though candy and white refined sugar products are dangerous and addictive, they're also helpful to people when their moods are down, and if used properly, and people are responsible to use things properly, they can really also be beneficial in a person's life if you don't eat so much that your teeth fall out. But anyway, thanks to John for caring about people and caring about our project. And Joe Pepper, she's always there with her brownies and her love and her great information, and she's been coming since the beginning of our project, and that's a lot to say. I wanted to keep the stock market to last. They've been a recent regular donator to us. We really started to rely on them, and they were rated by the CSU, the cannabis shutdown, or the corrupt shutdown unit that the provincial government has put in place here to to protect the monopoly that they have with the non-medical stores. And these places are being shut down and threatened and raided by the CSU, the most hated and despised police force ever in Canada. I don't know how those people can possibly do their jobs. And so very upset about that. And we're going to have a protest about that tomorrow at 1 p.m. at the VPD headquarters at Cambie Street and 4th, basically, right at the foot of the Cambie Street Bridge. You won't miss it because there's going to be a lot of other people there who also care that our governments think that they can treat us like chattel and slaves and just people to be exploited, and they can take away our right to access what is the most healing and beneficial of the medicinal herbs that is in nature. So we're very upset about that. We need all the people we can to come down there. If you've been angry about the government shutting out your access and shutting down dispensaries and denying sick and suffering Canadians the medicine that will help them the most, if you're upset about that, tomorrow's a great opportunity to have something to say about it. Come on down and join the rest of us, and let's show the VPD that we're ashamed of them, that they shouldn't be putting profits over people, and that they should really care about people and not care about the corporate masters that seem to be ruling the day with them. Did that show properly? Did I get that on there? I don't know. Yeah, you went back to... There we go. So there's a sign. Copy it if you want. Make others if you like. Tell your truth. Tell them the truth. Let's make a big event out of this and stop what they're doing there.
Let's go to this.
Let's go to this. Let's make a really good day of it. 1 o'clock on Wednesday at Cambie Street Police Station at the foot of the Cambie Street Bridge.
So what are they doing that makes you so upset that we're going to demonstrate on
Helping
them?
the provincial enforcement unit shut dispensaries in Vancouver, even after the city of Vancouver passed a motion saying they would allow for low barrier access and cannabis to help the opioid crisis, which is high dose edibles. So for them to be shutting those places down is threatening people's lives for sure. And we don't like that. We're upset about that. We're going to protest that. We're going to say shame on the VPD. Yeah, it's time we say enough is enough and stop allowing them to shut down our medical dispensaries. They can license them if they want. That's probably not a bad idea. I'm sure we'd like licenses. But those licenses can't require anything unreasonable because that's not reasonable. And we need to have storefronts where people can walk into without having to have a doctor's permission or any type of permission from any public servant and get the high dose edibles that they require, because people are dying by taking street opioids that are laced with fentanyl. And if they understood that they could have a much better time, they could solve the issues that they're trying to solve with their opiates with good, strong edibles and other cannabis products, then I'm sure that those places would be well supported by the community, and they'd be very busy places, because I think people would rather do high-dose cannabis edibles and have a good time and not die than go and drug themselves with the local street drugs that are who knows what, and take a chance of dying. And whatever the experience of those drugs in numbing the pain that they feel, that numbing can be done, and along with having a good time. I've heard people at our project talk about how they've been chasing a high for 30 years because they just don't feel good. They're depressed and they just want that experience of feeling good. While at the right dose, cannabis edibles and cannabis in concentrates and other forms can help you feel good. And it can help you deal with the things that people are dealing with. And we're all dealing with a lot of stuff. So unconscionable of our VPD. I don't think they understand. I actually wrote a letter to the deputy chief, and I said, I guess you don't understand that the city passed a motion allowing for low barrier access to cannabis, and specifically to target the overdose crisis. And that means what the stock market was doing was exactly that. And so for the government to walk in there and shut down a place, they're back open, I believe, but to shut down a place that is saving people's lives and providing access to something that people need for their own health and because they're sick and suffering, well, that's unconscionable. And that can't be happening. And we can't just sit back and allow that to happen. So if you can't come down and join us outside of the police headquarters, Cambie Street Bridge on the south side, maybe you could phone them. Don't use the emergency number, but phone them or send them an email or comment on their Facebook page or something to let them know that they're supposed to be protecting us. And what they're doing with supporting the CSU is protecting corporate greed and people who put profits over sick people and regular people who just want to access something to help them feel better. So I continue to be very upset about that. I hope we get a lot of people out there. And this situation that we talk about every week on the show, it's almost beyond words. I mean, we really... There's so many reasons this should stop, and yet here we are. We still have to fight for our rights and fight against a government that we pay to hopefully, serve and protect us. But obviously that's not the case, and so we have to fight them. We have to fight them in the courts, and we have to fight them in the court of public opinion, and every which way we can to get our rights back and respected, and be able to have a good world for our kids and their kids beyond them. So there's a few things that are going on in the world. There's a Holloweed event there's a few things going on in the world, Halloween. We don't have time to talk about them all. In fact, I'm not sure I have enough to talk about in the time we have. But
you got Holloweed, Thornton.
I'm going to go over them.
Right,
Oh, yeah. I got it. Oh, yeah. I've got a few more things. I think Cheech and Chong are still out there doing their thing at different events. You should. I saw them on in a selfie or Ussie with Randy Kane yesterday on Facebook. So I guess they made a visit to Langley. I know they were playing in Abbotsford not too long ago. So check out them. I like Cheech and Chong because they've proven that you can do an incredible amount of psychoactive substances and still be healthy and bright when you're 80 years old. And they're very entertaining. And they've been doing what they've been doing for a long time, and I guess they do definitely deserve support. And from a stupid stoner to a pretty smart octogenarians, proven that there's no reason for any government to ever tell you that you can't do to yourself whatever you want to do to yourself. And if you're not hurting nobody else, it ain't nobody's business but yours. That's for sure. So there's a Holloweed event happening here in Vancouver at Thornton Park all night long on Halloween itself on the 31st. So that's pretty cool, and that's the 420 Farmers Market, the pop-up markets that are so valuable and important to people here in Vancouver. They also have been chased down and persecuted almost out of existence by the VPD, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow too. But they're not gone. They're going to have another event at Thornton Park, and there's going to be a lot more coming after that as they kind of hold down the winter again like they did last year, providing access to high-dose edibles for people and low-barrier, low-cost, good-quality cannabis. So good on them, and let's support their event, and let's get a little bit crazy on Halloween night. It's supposed to be a nice, cold night. Dress appropriately, dress scarily. And what I do for Halloween basically is I try to scare the kids because I think that's the theme of the whole thing. And so whenever I get a chance, I tell kids all about the horrors of diabetes and how you can lose your limbs and have your teeth fall out and get fat and die, and try to help them make responsible decisions about what they do with their bags of candies that I won't contribute to, but many other people do. So anyway, that's my take on Halloween is I think it's a good time to scare the kids. There's also another Holloweed event coming up. It's a little bit after Halloween, I believe. That's coming up on November 8th, 9th, and 10th in the Kootenays. And you can Google that and check on that one. That's a membership-only event, except that when you go there, you just pay a fee to get in, and that makes you a member. And then there's all kinds of vendors, tables, and access to things that you want to get there. And I'm sure a good time will be had by all as we extend the Halloween holiday into the next week after the first one. There's the Prairie Harvest Medicinal Cup, and it's coming up also November 8th, 9th, and 10th. It's in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. That's the Friendly Cup. That's where, friends that are activists and growers and med users gather from all different directions from Canada there, some from the States, and have a really good time with Saskatoon and Jeff being our host there. Always an amazing job. The food is fabulous. The times are great. And it's a real event to put into your memory bank. And that's what we do as we live our life. We try to have good experiences and put things into our memory banks and our bank of good experiences. And that's a great one. I highly recommend it. If you haven't been there, you got to go. And if you've been there, I know you want to go. So I think this is the 9th annual Prairie Harvest Medicinal Cup. Google that, check it out, buy tickets, see what it costs. And if you want to vend, that's a great place to vend. There's no open cannabis vending due to scares by the evil empire that still wants to control their monopoly and profits. But there's lots of other things that you can vend there, and lots of things to do with the cannabis world that people need to know about, and products people want to buy. And there's creative ways to do vending of the other types of things that people want as well. So bring your buds, because you're allowed to share buds. And,
especially if you have a phone number or another contact, that's just a nice place to be.
It's a great place to meet people and exchange phone numbers, isn't it? It is. I'm sure that there won't. And I'm sure there will be no problems with people getting whatever access to whatever they wanted access to, because it's so friendly. That's true. Other than that, keep track of our court challenges and those sorts of things. We have regular shows on Pot TV. I'm very thankful to Cannabis Culture and Pot TV for allowing me the use of this studio to get things off my chest. I need to do that to feel good about my ability to make changes in the world. If you want to help change the world, then that can give you some hope. And if you want to have some hope, then help change the world. There's always something that everybody can do, and every little thing makes a huge difference. And you never know what person you're going to tell what to that might ripple down all through other types of people and things and help change the world. And we need all of us to try to help change this messed up world that's been so overtaken by corporate greed and corruption that runs very deep even in this province. So on Wednesday we have Marijuana Man with From Under the Influence. Greg Williams really tells it like it is in a way that is very encapsulating. And tune into his show every Wednesday and see him and his co-hosts rehash and hash about what it is that's going on in our world and just how crazy all that shit is, for sure. And on Friday is Jeremiah Vandermeer with Cannabis Culture News Live. And Jeremiah always brings you the latest, greatest on what's going on in the cannabis world with a variety of guests and co-hosts, Johnny B. and other people that help Jeremiah with that show. And that's a very entertaining show to watch, but not quite as entertaining as on Mondays. And I'm going to get to Saturdays. I guess we'll do Saturdays. Alyssa's got High Noon on Saturdays, right?
Coming up, not this week, next week, I believe, is the 100th episode, and the plan is to smoke 100 joints.
Wow, so Boss Lissa at High Noon in a week, 100th show, gonna blaze 100 joints.
100 joints.
All by herself in 10 minutes.
I think some people are gonna come by and help.
All right, come and help Boss Lissa if you want to celebrate her 100th show. That's amazing that she's done 100 shows already. And a good time is had there. And I alluded to probably the most entertaining show where you can find out why it's great to enjoy yourself with the cannabis lifestyle. The 420 Lifestyle Show with Carly Marley and BC Bud Gal happens every Monday. They've probably done over 100 shows a long time ago. And I know whenever they do a show, it's a party, that's for sure. I think all of this is the remnants of this. And yeah, it's just the most fun you can have on Pot TV. I'm not as much fun. I'm sorry about that, but what I got to talk to you about isn't always as much fun, but they're great at that. So tune in on Mondays for that show. And I want to thank my guest, Chris Bennett, today. What an awesome wealth of information and a resource and an amazing person who's put together all this information that we need to ingest and pass on to all of our friends and family so that they understand our roots as well. So a big thanks to Chris Bennett for coming on the show, and Jerry Martin for joining me for the Martin Medical Moment and as we follow his case through the courts, and Glenn Wells, 8 out of 10 Glenn from CannaMatch. Check that out, CannaMatch.ca. If you're lonely and you want to find somebody to smoke weed with, CannaMatch.ca. And Neil, my co-host, who makes it all work, that is amazing to me because I certainly couldn't do it all by myself. And to all of you for watching, thank you so much, and go out and change the world. Just have as much fun as you can doing that, and we'll see you next week.
Are we still banned on YouTube? I'm Marijuana Man. Welcome to From Under the Influence. If they had weed, guaranteed they would make money. That's the only conclusion I can come to, is they don't have any weed. Because people are still going to buy it, for God's sakes. People actually like weed and want to buy weed. And a huge number of people have no choice but to come and buy it from you. And still, you can't make money? Holy fuck. Now what? What are you going to do to us now? When I was even at a very young age, go, wow, like, why would this be illegal? It is so much fun.
Outlawing laughter and feeling good.
Yeah,
What?
laughing. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. Peace. And fun.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
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 Hi. It's high noon here in the studio.
Look at it. Look at the bud. Right there.
And it was just like so many people, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I was like, I have to cross it.
Acronyms, baby.
I love
So you
how
paid
they're
$8
like,
for half a pencil.
I love
just put it out there.
I know that we gon' make it out.